Welcome to this, the 8th video in a series in which I, a board game enthusiast, try to reduce my board game collection by half. I will explain my thinking as I decide what I'm going to keep and what's got to go, and it might help you think about what you like in a board game. But why am I doing this? Well, I've only gone and moved house again, and my destination is a flat, and so I'm downsizing a bit. I actually don't have room for this bookcase that I keep my board games on, so for that reason, I'm going to have to get rid of some games so that I can fit into my new abode. And here I am in the new flat, in the new pad, and if you've been watching this series, you will have noticed that there's been an 8-month gap between this video and the previous video. What happened was, in this series, where in each video I had been resolving to sell half of my board games, and each video I would resolve to sell particular games. Well, what happened was I actually got on with selling those games. But when I was doing that, I ended up selling some of the games which I had said that I was going to keep. And I sold some games which I hadn't addressed yet in the series. So, it was an emotional thing. I just did it. And but then I thought to myself, what does this leave the series? So I've been a bit stumped as to what to do. But I finally hit the record button and decided, I owe it to the people that have been watching the series, and I really do appreciate all of the comments and encouragement that I've had. So I thought the least I could do was make this video for you, and I do want to say sorry for the long gap, but also for what will be an abrupt conclusion to the series. So without further ado, let's wrap this up, shall we? Now, as I said, the series was partway through the board game collection, so a good place to start would be to look at the games at which I had not addressed yet, and perhaps a good one to start with would be Glory to Rome. Glory to Rome is a high-octane card game. It's one big deck of cards, this game. The cards come in 6 different suits representing 6 materials. Some materials are more valuable than others. What you're trying to do is jam these materials into your vault here in a 1st century AD Rome. And your problem is at the start of the game, you have a small vault, only room for 2 cards. And so you want to increase the size of your vault. And how do you get a bigger vault in Rome? Well, you increase your influence in Rome. And the setting of this game is after a great fire of Rome in AD 64, you're trying to impress the Emperor Nero. And what you do is, to increase your influence, you have to build buildings. And the cards are buildings as well at the same time as materials. So these buildings are on cards that you play from your hand, and then you will be looking for particular types of cards, materials to stuff under them to complete that building, which will increase your influence, which will increase your vault size. And that's the kind of aim of the game. But in Glory to Rome, you'll have cards in front of you as buildings, cards in your vault, cards in your hand, cards in a pool in the middle of the table, cards in your clientele, another area, cards in your stockpile. And you will be taking different actions in the game to move the cards between these different places, different locations, and the actions are on the cards as well. So if you take the laborer action, you will move a card from the pool into your stockpile. If you take the merchant action, a card will go from your stockpile into your vault. And the cards move between these locations in intricate ways, but then you have to include other players' areas as well, because you can get cards out of their hand and their stockpile and so on. So as you can imagine, it's a lot of cogs and mechanisms here in the game Glory to Rome. But here's the crucial bit. The buildings affect these actions in ways that are really fantastic. And the higher value buildings are really exceedingly powerful. But then what happens is the way you can get buildings to combine, they can be ridiculously powerful. And it can actually feel like this game is like a race to break the game. It's one of those games where everybody will just at some point will throw up their hands and say, "This is ridiculous. Look at the position that this player is in." But that said, what can often happen is a suddenly powerful position can just dry up in a moment. And also, something that you can do is you can actually react to what is going on and play cards and build buildings to respond to what other players are doing. Now, what's that called? Oh, yes, interaction. As you may or may not be aware, Glory to Rome is not widely available because it's no longer being published, and there was some wranglings between the publisher designer and the other designer of the game, which and they have no heart to publish it again, but they retain the rights. Therefore, this game is unavailable. You can't buy it anywhere. And I've actually never seen another copy of Glory to Rome anywhere other than mine. So selling this will mean I will likely never play it again. Yet, sell it I did. And of course, that begs the question, what on earth price should I put on a game like Glory to Rome? And I just went for the figure of 180 quid, and boom, it sold in 4 minutes online. Bora Bora is another great game which I don't think will get reprinted. Well, there is quite a demand for that game at the moment. Stefan Feld has hinted that it will get a retheme. I'm sure this game will come back in some form, because it is such a good game. It's one of my favorite games ever, and certainly my favorite Feld board game. So this is a designer, Stefan Feld, I'm talking about. The thing about it is it's so dense and compact yet, and it's a very meaty strategic game that plays within 2 hours. So if that does get a retheme, then that would be one to look out for. Stefan Feld has been doing this, retheming his games and publishing them with Queen's Games publisher recently. Despite the fact that Bora Bora will not be reprinted and it's a really good game, I resolved to sell it. And I've been selling these games on Facebook, in a Facebook group here in the UK, Board Game and Trading UK. And what I did was, because board games come in a box, I didn't put it in a box to post in. I just wrapped it with bubble wrap and put it in a postal bag. And so I ended up having 26 parcels, but the postal service then comes and collects them. So that part was actually surprisingly okay. The tricky bit is the admin. Putting, I did it in 2 groups, 2 sale posts of 13 games and 13 games roughly, and the admin then of getting all those addresses and interacting with people, getting the money off people was really easy. I mean, people were really good. They just use PayPal, and just the money came straight through. So that was no problem. It's just then going through the faff of getting their addresses and so on and getting the postage. I resolved to sell Food Chain Magnate and Ketchup expansion. Despite the fact that I have a sentimental connection there, because my name is on the rulebook in Ketchup as a playtester, but sold it I did. The reason behind that really was because I was finding that to play Food Chain Magnate, I had to include the Ketchup expansion, which is a big box full of modules, and it's actually felt like just a bit of a burden to try and think ahead of time. Because you really have to choose which modules. For me, I'd have to choose them before we actually play the game and make sure I know what's going on. And that just was a hurdle to getting it to the table. And I guess what I'm saying is it just became a little bit fussy, which is actually true of a lot of games with expansions. They become fussy and just become a bit of an obstacle to play. Not a big problem if you have a regular game group and so on, but that's not my circumstances at this time. Although I think Imperial 2030 is as close to elegant board game design perfection as I know, I sold Imperial 2030. And the reason why is because I just don't have a game group at the minute to play these long strategy board games. And so what I did was I resolved to keep Agricola and Caelus and really get rid of the rest. And with Imperial 2030, it's a game that goes a bit of a longer player time. So it's really more around the 3 hour mark. So for that reason, I sold it. Two games that I was ready to let go of are Madeira and Crystal Palace. Madeira is a great game, really enjoyable, also unavailable and perhaps not. And somebody commented on the sales post that it won't be coming back in print. One thing with Madeira is that the game sort of presents you with the same game, the same challenges each time. There's not a lot of variety from one game to the next. So to play this game 6 or 7 times, you'll have a brilliant time. But for me, I've done that, so I'm ready to move on. Whereas Crystal Palace, the issue with that game is that it doesn't really present you with any goals or challenges at all. And so this is a game that I really didn't like. The issue is that it has 5 rounds, and at the end of each round, the whole board sort of gets swept, and there's very little to sort of hang your hat on and to look through the game for a long-term strategy. So I found that one to be really quite baffling. There were some games that I was minded to sell, but when I looked to see what price I could get for them, it turned out that they were widely available for really low prices. So it's kind of not worth paying the postage and selling the games. And I'm talking here about Hansa Teutonica and Glass Road, some of my favorite games. But if I was going to play a board game next Saturday, what I would want to play is something new, you see. So I really felt it was time to let go. But I couldn't really get any price for them. And do you know, just like a couple of years ago, both of those games would have been really valuable because they were just totally unavailable and in demand. But then comes the reprint with the updated artwork and promotions, and then it's really hard to sell. So the moral of the story is that if you're a person who wants to buy new games, right, and play new games, you really do need to be selling your board games before they get reprinted or while there's a demand. You got to sell them while they're hot. That's if you want to keep playing new games. Otherwise, by definition, that's what you've got to do. Otherwise, you're going to end up like, wasn't it Sid Sackson, the designer, that ended up with like, a huge basement full of board games. And I think it's a bit sad. I think when he died, his wife just gave out an open invitation to for people to come and take whatever games they wanted. So like that's where that ends up. If ever you are selling board games, of course you want to check to see if the game is available in stock. If it's not, then if the game is any good, then there'll be somebody out there looking for it, and you will be able to set a higher price. And with the games I sold, several of them, I got the money back that I spent buying the game, and even got some more money on some of them. Like Glory to Rome, I bought for £35, sold for 180. The Splotter games are always good for this. I could have sold Indonesia for a lot more. I actually lowered the price because it's notorious, that game, for having a kind of botched production. But do you know, I didn't need to do that. There was people that were really desperate for it, so that was a mistake. In all, I sold these games for £1,100. Postage probably cost like £200 or something. £900 from selling 26 games, but really that's not what it was about for me. And speaking of buying and selling, let's talk about 2 stocks and shares games. First up, let's talk about Airlines Europe, which is another game that will not get reprinted. Alan Moon basically said as much, the designer, in an interview recently. And he said, though, that it might come back as a train game. Maybe it will. It actually started out as a train game, Union Pacific, but this Airlines Europe, it will not come back in with that theme. But this is a game that I really love. Stocks and shares games are interesting because they're not as intuitive or as immediate as other games like Ticket to Ride is Alan Moon's other game, which is a huge hit and you've probably heard of. It's the poster child for modern board gaming, Ticket to Ride. But stocks and shares games, the issue there with them is that in stocks and shares games, the value of things is not decided at the start of the game. It's not defined, and that's going to develop during the game, that uncertainty is going to be unsettling for people. It's like, one step removed, isn't it? But for people like me, I really find it fun. With Stockpile, what it does is it's like a stocks and shares game, but that is the most accessible and immediate version of this game possible, imaginable. And for me, it actually goes too far, boils it down too far, and I felt like I didn't have any control or agency in the game, really. Airlines Europe has that stocks and shares principle going on where you want to push up the value of airlines in which you have shares, while at the same time you want to try and get shares which are in the most valuable airlines. You can look at the shares that you have and try and make sure that those airlines are spending big money on these high ticket routes to push up the value of your shares. But at the same time, you watch what other players are pushing up in terms of value and try and grab those shares. And that is, in essence, this game. It's very, very simple design. It's got this elegance, streamlined design that Alan Moon took to Ticket to Ride, but in a stocks and shares game. And yet, it's stocks and shares. Is there a demand for this, an accessible stocks and shares game? Well, I think I'm not sure if it will get republished, but for that reason, because I really like this one, I'm going to hold on to it. Innovation is another card game from the designer of Glory to Rome, Karl Chuduk, and this one is almost just as interesting. And so what this game is like a civilization game, but just through using cards, and there's like 10 little decks of cards, and you're trying to like move up through the ages, and they get more and more interesting and powerful. It's not a hugely strategic game. It's more of a case where the game plays you. The game tells you, guides you what to do, but it's really entertaining. These cards that you're looking at are like little bits of computer code almost, and you're laying them down in front of you and then seeing what happens and how they interact. Actually, quite often, one person will run quite far ahead, but there can be, dramatic twists and changes. Somebody will race ahead into the modern age while I'm still in medieval times, but then we'll discover that gunpowder works surprisingly well against fighter jets. And there'll be these sort of hilarious twists and turns. It does go up to 4 players, this game, but I've only ever played it 2-player. The criticism I've heard is that there are too many icons going on to track with 4 players, so it's just too much hard work. But I've always played it 2 and really enjoyed it. And for that reason, I'm going to keep it because it's just a really fun, different 2-player game. And also I have an 18-year-old nephew who I could envisage playing this game with. I'm going to keep my small card games. These are staples, games which are really come in handy for different situations. Like 6 Nimmt goes up to 10 players and can be taught in 2 minutes. So that's a bit special. And Teach You is like a 4-player game, but in teams. So 2 teams of 2 and in partnerships. And if you are a couple that is playing a game with another couple, that's a really fun dynamic to do. So that's a game to check out if you haven't played that. I think that's all the games I hadn't addressed yet. Maybe I'll talk about Promised Land in the next video. But what about those games that I had said that I would keep but then went on to sell? Well, Age of Empires 3, even though I painted all of like hundreds of little figures, I resolved to sell it because I'm just not going to play it, and I sold it for 80 quid. But what a bargain that was. And Gaia Project is another game that I sold after me meticulously putting together that insert for somebody else. So now it's that time in the video to look at my progress to see how I've done at achieving my goal of selling 50% of my board games. And as this is the final video, this is going to be the final reveal, and it is to show you that I've sold like over 3/4 of my board games, but that's given that some of the games I've kept, it's just because I don't want to sell them. They don't really have that much value. So if you are invested in the board game hobby as I have been, then this could be quite challenging really, but perhaps that's a good thing. I hope so, and I hope that you have enjoyed this video. I really felt I ought to make this to everybody that's watched the series so far. I really do appreciate that. As for me, the real goal ended up being getting these board games into a cupboard, because that is my new attitude towards board games, and who knows what that means for this channel. I'm going to post another video tomorrow where I will talk about what's going on behind the scenes, but you can have a look at that if you feel drawn to know. But otherwise, thank you for watching this video, and thank you so much for joining me on this series. I hope this last video has been like a bit interesting, right? I didn't know that this was going to happen. I didn't know that I was going to end up in this destination when I started. So I hope that's been a little bit interesting for you. But really, thank you so much for watching, and thank you to everybody that supported the Unfussy Board Games channel. I will see you in the next video, perhaps.